Now let's go back to Israel one last time. One last time. Let's talk about Zechariah. Zechariah came to the throne of Israel and reigned for only 6 months. 2 Kings 15 and verse 9 says that he did evil in the sight of the Lord as his fathers had done. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. Now, something that we're going to see as we look at these last few kings of Israel. Some of them reigned for a little bit longer than others, but most of them didn't reign for very long, and the length of their reign was, or the time of their reign was pretty much filled with dissension, was filled with fighting, with hardship. Zechariah's reign only lasted for 6 months because there was a man by the name of Shallum. Shallum was the son of Jabesh, and he plotted against Zechariah and assassinated the king. And he did this, ironically, very near to the place where King Jehu had killed Ahaziah, the king of Judah, in 2 Kings 9 and verse 27. Well, you may remember last week, I mentioned to you the fact that we were now at the end of that 4th generation from Jehu. Remember, God had promised that the descendants of Jehu would reign over Israel to the 4th generation. Well, now that family line has come to an end. When Zechariah was killed and Shallum claimed the throne for himself, a new family of kings ascended to the throne of Israel. We find that the bloodshed that Jehu had carried out had finally come full circle. For we find that Jehu came to power at the end of the sword, and his family came to lose their power at the end of the sword. This was the end of that generation. What I want to do, I want to look at several of these kings, and then we'll go back and we'll make some applications. But let's look at Shallum. Things were continuing to get worse. Israel was not getting closer to God. It seems that each king that came to power was a little bit farther away from God. God is about to the point where he's going to let this nation fall. Well, we come to the last few kings of Israel. This escalating wickedness that was taking place in that nation had now brought them to the point that God's judgment was at hand. They weren't going to be allowed to survive very much longer. Well, Shallum, as I said, came to the throne by assassinating the king. Zechariah, the final descendant of Jehu, and he claimed the throne for himself in 2 Kings 15 and verse 10. But Shallum would only reign for how long? 1 month. 1 month. And the reason for this was because another man wanted the throne just as bad, if not worse, than Shallum did. A man, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, a man by the name of Menehem. He arrived in the city of Samaria. He came in. He killed King Shallum. And he claimed the throne for himself in 2 Kings 15 and verse 14. Well, 2 Kings 15:15 tells us that essentially the only thing that Shallum is remembered for is the fact that he killed King Zechariah. Imagine that being the only thing that a person is remembered for, is that one act of violence. Well, then we have King Menehem. Menehem came to the throne in the exact same way that King Shallum had, by killing the previous king, by taking the throne for himself. But we find that during this time, there were some who were loyal to Shallum, who did not want Menehem to be king. And so they refused to submit to this king. Now, I cannot think of a non-graphic way to describe what this king is about to resort to. So if what I'm about to describe offends you, I do apologize. But I cannot think of a way that is non-graphic to describe what he does. 2 Kings 15:16 says that he goes into the city of Tifshah. And there he finds all of the pregnant women. He rips their stomachs open. And essentially what that text is saying is he kills all the unborn children. And of course, in that, many of those mothers would have lost their lives as well. The reason this was done was essentially as a scare tactic, as a display of the brutality that this man was willing to resort to in order to retain power. He didn't care if he had to kill his own people if it meant he got to keep his position. How many different leaders have we seen in history, those that history now describe as despots and as just heinous people, were willing to kill even their own people if it meant keeping their position?
Josh, that was going on in Vietnam in '67. The Viet Cong would come into a village and kill the people, starting with the leaders of the village. And they would, if there was a woman had a baby, they'd take her to the heels and bust his head. I mean, it was this, we think about that would have been over with, it wouldn't have been that cruel. But the Viet Cong was doing this to scare the countryside. Yeah. So they could keep power. So man's been doing violent things like this for centuries.
And it's amazing, but it's also disgusting, the things that we see mankind willing to resort to, the kinds of violence that human beings are able to inflict on others.
That's part of the reason why our young men and women who went to Vietnam to fight couldn't adjust to. That was a shock to their system. They weren't prepared for that. What was happening?
For that type of heinous scene, yeah.
Exactly.
But you see, that's what these kings, because they had moved so far away from faithfulness to God, they were willing to resort to whatever it took to retain their position. And we find that because, and of course this is speculation, but I think that the text implies that the only reason why Menehem was able to extend his reign for 10 years was because of the fear that he instilled in the people. But we're told that during that time he did evil in God's sight and he walked in all the sins of Jeroboam. He was a wicked, wicked man. Now we're almost out of time, but I want to mention one last thing about King Menehem. It was during the reign of this king that Pul, the king of Assyria, came against Israel for the first time. Menehem, wanting to spare his life and keep his position, he paid a tribute of 1,000 pieces of silver to the king of Assyria. But the way that the king collected those funds was not out of his own treasury, but he went to the wealthiest people in the land and demanded that each one of them contribute 50 shekels of silver. The people had to pay for this tribute. Well, after receiving payment, the Assyrian king left. And he stayed gone, left Israel alone. But we find that this peace treaty would not last for very long. Because we're going to find that eventually, and really the next 4 chapters in 2 Kings, are going to be a series of attacks. Assyria coming in a little at a time, conquering that land, until eventually Israel is going to fall. It's going to be defeated, their capital is going to be destroyed, and the people are going to be carried away into Assyrian captivity. Well, we're going to stop there, and Lord willing, next Wednesday night we'll pick up with continuing to look at these last few kings of Israel, and we'll look at King Pekahiah.